Thank you to everyone for joining us today. Um, Also, thank you to Patricia as well and everyone at Malaprops for hosting us and for everything you're doing uh, during this very strange time. Um, yes, so Malaprops Bookstore is very near and dear to our hearts. Um, Joan and I met at the Warren Wilson MFA program, which is a low residency program, the first of its kind in the world, as far as I know. And the residencies took place twice a year just outside of Asheville. So Malaprops was a favorite destination for all of us students, now alums, who we'd all cram into cars and drive there, usually returning with armfuls of books and just, having such extended, rich conversations as we roamed the shelves. So it's always been very close to us. And um, last March, in fact, I was thrilled to have a real in the person uh, event scheduled to take place, which then, of course, subsequently was not to be, just as the reality of the pandemic and shelter in place dug in. So we are so happy to be hosted today by Malaprops, and I hope that everyone who's here joining us today will definitely patronize the store. At the end, I understand, we're going to be talking about, as sort of implied or promised, we're going to be talking about published collections of letters between authors. And I believe there will be a list of these books that you might want to look into. And I would encourage you um, to get them from Malaprops. Okay, so I mentioned that Joan and I met at our first residency at Warren Wilson. And as we returned to our homes, we began writing letters to one another, as in the tradition of many writers. And in fact, it's interesting to note that at that time, even the study that we were conducting with our faculty members at Warren Wilson was all by mail. Email was just, becoming a more known or widespread communication mode. So I don't know when that changed over, but it was all done by mail. And these letters were all just such a lifeline while we writers carried on our lives, working, um, tending to relationships, just all the necessary and myriad activities of living, laundry and laundry. Uh, so let's see. So in those days, I lived in the South in Charleston, and Joan was living in San Francisco. And it's just such a marvel to me that while so many bundles of correspondence I've lost over the years to many moves across the country, et cetera, a bundle of letters I never lost were those from Joan. And, even more of a marvel really is the fact that now, I mean, we never mentioned this ever, that I can ever recall ever speaking of this. We now live in adjacent neighborhoods to one another in the same Northern California city, which is just, it's a marvel. But we still write letters. Today they're electronic, mostly they're email, though sometimes we porch bomb one another's places with, that's what we call it. Here's a porch bomb, with books to share, um, bottles of wine, beer, all the necessities. And with these, we may include some handwritten communiques. I'm thinking, for example, at the beginning of the pandemic, when anxieties were really running very high, I remember handwriting a letter to Joan, feeling really feeling the need to tell her how important and why she is to me, as a writer and a dear writing friend. And leaving that on her porch with I think it was a little potted cutting from my jade plant. But so we continue writing letters. They're mostly through email, but they can also be very physical. And I noticed that also in this time of the pandemic, there are a lot of people, this sort of letter writing has picked up again. And I have been involved in some different pen pal, let's call it, physical handwriting of letters. And so I think this is something that's very interesting to me to think about as well. So anyhow, when she and I were talking about, well, what would we do? I really wanted to do an event with her to celebrate the publication of her latest novel, which I'll talk about just in a moment. We thought about, let's talk about this role of how important letters are in authors' lives, and why also I think authors do eschew talking on the phone. To be honest, I think there are probably many writers who are here in this event today. I don't know. I had this conversation with someone not too long ago, and she had a really sort of fancy name for writers, like a kind of phobia about talking on the phone that I don't remember what it was now. But I think it's really true that. It's just, we would rather communicate by writing letters. And so we thought that after we would share a little bit from our books, that we would also talk about the importance. We really want to hear from you, like what you think about why that may be. We thought we would talk about some of the published collections of letters that are meaningful to us. And we would love to hear from you about some of those that may be um, important to you as well. So um, I think I've been kind of talking, long enough about the introduction. And so what I would really like to do now is read a little bit from Joan's new novel, which is the the outlook for Earthlings. I hope the camera's picking it up well enough. And I think of this book itself, this novel, as a love letter in its own right. Um, the outlook for Earthlings concerns the lifelong friendship of two women, Melanie and Scarlett, who are beautifully, wonderfully different characters, different women. And the novel um, chronicles, that's not quite the right word, but it does chronicle their friendship over the years. And it alternates between points of view. And when I was trying to select a passage to read, which was very difficult to do, uh, very difficult, it's just such a beautiful book. I decided that because I'm always interested in the vital role that of children in a woman's life, how essential the choice is to have a child, uh, the fact of having a child is in the life of a woman. I decided to select a passage that is told in Melanie's point of view about this topic to share with you. And it is set in 1981. And here goes. Melanie asked Richard if they could talk after dinner. She was 30. Something had begun to speak in her. She thought it over carefully. Her doctoral work was crawling. The more she worked, the more she saw she needed to do, needed to know. The more her thesis unfolded complicatedly across time, a giant origami. But Melanie's own body was also calling, and through it, something larger. She must push for it now or renounce it altogether. She understood it would be difficult, a demand like no other. It wasn't as though she'd had no practice. She had helped rear her brother and sister, cared for her stepdaughters. She was dearly fond of Daff and Kara, though she despaired for the damage done by their mother's zealotry. The little girls already spoke of going on missions, a fact she and Richard could do nothing to divert. But beyond this, something intoned the words, a child, your own child. One of the great ventures, perhaps the great venture. The signals came like sonar from unsoundable depths. There are intervals when a woman's body comes awake to this knowledge of a terrible sudden, like a fireman bolting up in bed, skull shot with the bleeding alarm. And from then on, that body's only job is to chant its need day and night. Now, now. Not for all women, but for many. Melanie's answer vibrated through tissue, bone. Tissue and bone themselves replied, and something more, something not material, but dwelling in the material house of her, giving the answer, yes. It was January, cold and sleeting. They lived in a ground floor duplex. Richard had installed a pot-bellied stove they'd picked up at a flea market in fall, obtained permission to install it from the landlord after a fair amount of haggling. There was already a shaft for the smoke pipe. Mel loved the stove. The only other heat came from a weak vented unit in the wall. On nights like these, they loaded the pot-belly with small chunks of wood, and for hours it pulsed a force field of heat, showing bright orange red through the little barred window of its black door, through the seams around the door. Mel loved to read beside it, make notes, stare at the little red window, especially after Richard had gone to bed. It made lovely sounds, not only crackling and hissing, but beneath that, a sort of steady, white breathing. Richard had just sat down in his easy chair with a mug of tea, a script in his lap. Over time, he had plotted a schedule to wring utmost productivity from his waking hours, as if tapping maple syrup. As if tapping maple sap. Mel knew she was sundering that schedule by asking to talk with him now. His routine never varied. Up at 4, out the door by 5:30, work till early evening, quick dinner, return to school after dinner for rehearsals when he had a production, otherwise grading or going over lesson plans or scripts. Bed by 10. He looked at her from the easy chair, impatient. Annoyance reigned by a wish to appear reasonable. Reasonableness was a policy he felt bound to. If he reviewed his performance later, he could find it consistent. She pulled a chair close, their knees a foot apart. She had been married to Richard for 3 years, and for 3 years held before herself, like an effigy carried in procession, the steady admonishment that she loved her husband, though many facets of his character were like thorns. Gazing time after time into the pinched brown gold eyes, she told herself that the deficiency was hers. Richard grappled successfully with the world. She did not. She must acquire worldly knowledge through him, patiently, by installments painful to both of them. She would work harder at it. She would master the unease, the tension of vigilance, anticipate his reactions, code her words in tones to sustain him, hasten to correct her own careless habits when they displeased him. Dishes too long in the sink, thesis papers and books spread about, laundry building up, and nothing for him to wear. Pointless interruptions. Her worst failing, it seemed, was inaccuracy, inaccurate perceptions. Innocent observations she offered, wrong so much of the time it seemed, grievously, transgressively wrong. Oh, the panic in her heart when he slowly turned to accuse her, as if he were holding forth a dead puppy she'd carelessly killed. His grief, a kind of incredulity, stabbing her more than anger might. It posited a gentle soul, his, on whom horrible wrong had been wreaked by her. Her constant resolve to do better, be better, the sense of holding her breath, forbidden to exhale, to inhabit herself, lasted until Richard left the house. Then she could let down, breathe, think, the silence wrapping her soft as baby blankets. There must be the wages of commitment, and commitment was sacred. In sex, Richard went somewhere inside himself, his face closed when she searched it. And when he rolled off and onto his side, facing away from her, she contented herself, holding him around his middle from the back, spooned along the length of him, her lips at the nape of his neck, twining a shy ankle over his. For she'd always believed important messages traveled between their two skins at such times. He didn't move in those moments, but lay preoccupied, as if he were listening to something she could not hear. Soon he would slip his ankle free of hers, begin a deep snore. Oddly, she sometimes felt closest to Richard in public when he put his arm around her waist to introduce her. Perhaps it was absurd, but it was just then she felt for a moment like his mate. The way he presented the two of them as a unit, the arm tight around her. They were pioneers then, the right balance, woman to man. You glimpsed it when presidents snugged an arm around their wives' waists at the victory podium. Whether those presidents believed it then, of course, was another question. But she loved at least the intention of the impression, an indivisible set, the man proclaiming, "Here is the other half of me." This night, she wore her brown corduroy jumper, its long skirt and sturdy shoulder straps fortified her. She placed her hands on her kneecaps, looked at her hands, forgetting to wish, as she usually did, that they were not so blunt, so homely. She stared at the furrows of brown corduroy wail covering her knees like tilled rows of earth. She tried to infuse herself with a presidential partner's balance. "Dear, wouldn't you say we're in a reasonably good place now in terms of finances? Overall?" She appended the last word in a kind of flutter. Richard's eyes narrowed. Talk of money was not good. It was true they were solvent, saving slowly. True, he had a decent salary, better in fact than he'd ever earned before. They kept strictly current of their bills, including his child support to Lily, his student loan. Mel paid her graduate class fees out of money from her library job. Richard gave her a small household allowance. They lived modestly, thanks, he did not know how much, to Mel's careful economizing, and the fact they never took vacations, except to drive down to see his mother and Mel's family. But he preferred his handling of money not to be questioned, and she knew it. "Why?" he answered. The potbelly hissed, crackled. Mel saw no reason to prolong the preamble. She fixed his eyes with hers, lit now like crystal. Richard, I believe it would be wonderful to have a child. He stared at his wife. She met his gaze, heart jungle drumming. Richard set down his cup. The script slipped sideways in his lap. He bowed his head. And I will stop there.
Peg, thank you for that beautiful, sensitive reading. And thank you, Stephanie and Patricia, for having us. I just want to get in as much as I can in what time is given us. That was lovely. I hadn't expected you to go so far and so deeply, but I'm honored and flattered and touched. Thank you. I want us to have time to go into what makes letters so delicious, and to point out that, yes, our letters between each other have been a real oxygen line for us since more years ago now than both of us are willing to name. And particularly also that in the Outlook for Earthlings, the two characters do a lot of letter writing to each other by email. And that signifies, when we talked about showing up tonight, Peg and I talked about what it was that we'd like to break down about letters that made them so entirely delicious. And I know both of us have all kinds of notes about it. I also wanted to read a little bit from Peg's beautiful book. And because we are thinking about women and children particularly, I'm going to do that now. And then I hope we'll have time to unpack a little bit what it is about letters, the elements that sing to us, call to us, especially in a plague year, but also long, long before. Peg's beautiful book is A Girl Goes into the Forest. It's like nothing you will have ever read. I can almost promise that. It's like a little compendium of jewels. And each jewel is like a gypsy's magic, what are they called, Peg? Those spheres that they look into? Fortune tellers, crystal ball.
Oh,
That's it. Each is like a crystal ball, and each word is so distilled that you must read them very slowly and let them reverberate in you. They're very short and very, very intense. And I'm going to read two, it's only going to take 4 minutes, that relate enough to women and children that it will be somewhat connected to what Peg read of mine. They're toward the end of the collection, which I urge on everyone, don't forget. The first is called The Radio Played a Song. She'd never meant to have a baby. The baby's father spent his days at a trade school and his nights ostensibly studying on campus. The baby spent most days and nights sleeping, a tiny pink package curled in a white bassinet, or more often in her mother's lap. She, the mother, she had to get used to knowing this was who she was now. Spent her days and nights feeling guilty because she hadn't wanted a baby. Not when there was a whole world out there that she knew nothing about. And in this old house in the middle of nowhere, herself, whom she knew so little about. Nights were lonely. She was alone with the baby. She sat by the window, holding the sleeping baby and staring out at the pink haze, sodium vapor, swaddling the city far away. The city that held a school where her husband studied, and more. The radio played a song. Life is what happens while you're making other plans. And she took consolation in the lyrics. She stroked the fine blonde hair of the baby whose head fit in the cup of her hand, and fervently hoped that when the baby was 18, she would live her own plans before becoming a mother. That the baby wouldn't ever know how hard it had been for her mother to stay in the rocking chair alone in the house while wanting to be out in the ruby darkness of night. The mystery of what night held, at the very least a father, most likely in a bar, perhaps complaining to someone beautiful. The radio played, drawing her heart from her chest. She sang along, thinking even that she sounded good. But the baby stirred and nuzzled her breast, as if to remind her mother what her heart was for. She stopped singing. She rocked the tiny girl back to sleep. And at the end of the collection, this one is called Burning. My parents' eyes rested on me when I was a child, weighing the matter from their distance of authority. That was what it was. That was what it was to be theirs. They believed they knew me better than I knew myself. Even my mind seemed to belong to them up to a certain age. I can read you like a book. That I did not think what they thought I thought was my dark secret, one that could fill me with guilt, while still at times I feared they did know what I was thinking, and they would not be pleased. Don't give me that look. Stars fell into the lake, hissing, clotting. Sometimes I wished that they did know what I was thinking, for though they would not rest a gentle hand on my head, I would be less lonely. The moon poured its light into a lake on the other side of the world. My parents were one, a unit in their commitment to making me. To leave home unformed, a young person, was to burn far away, the way some stars must, not wanting to exist in the same sky with the others. But a life gets lived, a mind becomes one's own, perhaps while no one's watching. She's got a mind of her own. Some starless nights I wander the streets, once the moon has set, houses crouched in the dark, harmless, unseeing. My parents' eyes assessing the worth of me, their child they'd made. I don't want to forget that feeling. When I do, it will mean they are all the way gone. Thank you, Peg. How beautiful that was. And reverberates around me in the air, even when I'm finished. I think I'd love to add here a quote I found, and I wrote you, Peg, not long ago. In fact, audience, you'll hear us saying to each other, oh, I wrote this to you, remember. These words are from Ursula Le Guin, and they so inspired me because I think Peg is like this too, and a lot of writers are. I live and die by language. I live and die by what's written to me. I never forget. I can try to forgive. It's not always easy. Le Guin said, quote, words are events. They do things, change things. They transform both speaker and hearer. They feed energy back and forth and amplify it. They feed understanding or emotion back and forth and amplify it. I think that's very much the situation in a nutshell with letters. And I've tried to think for the occasion of this with Peg about why they are so exquisitely delicious to a writer. I had another thought, Peg, that we didn't talk about. One of the, much of the lore surrounding the late William Maxwell, whom we both admire so much, was that when interviewers would come to the house and ask him questions, he insisted on sitting down at a typewriter and typing his answers. Do you remember that? It's true. It's true. And I know why. I know why. In the same way that it's always said that writers often write to find out what they think, I think that the absolute same truth is applicable to letters, that one sits down, one can't wait to sit down to type out to one's trusted witness friend. And that's the true friend, the one that one trusts, what one thinks. And one may not know until the words come through your hands onto the keyboard, or in the case of a handwritten, same thing, through the hands, through the pen, onto the page. And I find this miraculous, almost creepy, superstitious miraculous, like a Ouija board, in a sense. where the perceptions occur almost as you are searching for them and travel through the brain and the arms and the hands as you seek to express them. It's all a rather miraculous alchemy to me. And it's one I cherish. I can also say this, that my entire career as a writer began with a letter to a trusted friend about the experience of turning 40. And I realized that if I cut off Dear Maria and Love Joan, I had an essay before me. And that was kind of where it began. I do think, in a way, that all of what we write could be construed as a letter, even any form of fiction, short and long, if you thought about it, could be construed as a letter. But then we can get into that later, about, because I'm thinking very much of this involves issues of tone. Do you want to comment on?
I do. I do. There's so much you've said here. So um, it seems like we could talk about this for many
Ever,
hours.
forever.
But I do think yes, I do think that nearly everything we write is really a love letter. So I do think that. And I also think um, that there is such a different um, voice and tone, but well, no, it's more than that. It's deeper than that. There is a different kind of sense of discovery for ourselves. I think this is something you were getting at,
Mhm.
perhaps, where we we can hardly wait. I believe you said we can hardly wait to write this thing to a trusted witness, but um, but there is more to what that trusted witness is. But but we discover something. I think so. When you're saying that, what I'm thinking about is how we may also be. Um, we may also write a journal. So in my mind at this moment, I'm thinking about the difference between Virginia Woolf's diaries and her collected letters.
Mhm.
Very, they're very different. And I'm thinking about it in the same way as um, when writers read something aloud. So, for example, we all know the advice to read your own work aloud to yourself. This will help you know how to work on it, how to go deeper, what to cut out, et cetera, et cetera. We know that when we read that same work to another person, how it will differ. And we also know that when we read it to, so say that other person is like a trusted other. And then we also know when we read it aloud to a group that may be anonymous to us, we also learn something more. We discover something more about what we've written. And I think it is the same in a way with the writing of 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 our letters, whether they are uh, novel manuscripts or short stories, or whether they are actual letters or emails or etc. There is an important sense of what we may be listening for in ourselves that we may not, that we don't know. I think it's a mysterious process. I think it's beautifully mysterious, which
I
is
quite
when
agree.
it's just beautifully mysterious. What is this that what is it that I learn about myself in writing a letter to you that um, writing a letter to my partner? There we learn something more. And I think, so just to kind of move into our idea about talking about, because I'm aware of time. So thinking about the collections, published collections of letters, I was thinking about, for example, I have a collection of the letters of Edith Wharton, and how different her voice sounds.
Mm,
So
mm.
different, and it seems almost sometimes you can feel, or maybe it's just me, but I sense like this feeling of her coming upon some um, recognition that is going to find its way into a larger work. And um, I think I see this all the time, like in these published collections. But also, I just want to say about the William Maxwell. If we ever get over this pandemic and you and Bob come back over, I'm going to get my typewriter out.
That's terrific. That's
And
terrific.
when
Thank
you
you.
ask, when you ask for a drink, I will let you know what I think about that.
Oh, I needed that. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I want to say, when you mentioned Edith Wharton's letters, I'm thinking now very often letters can turn on a dime in terms of appealing to us, even when we see how they fed the work. I'm thinking of Scott Fitzgerald's letters, and
Right.
how, forgive me, anyone out there who I may be offending, but how after a while you wanted to say, oh, just shut up and get on with it. Stop it with the niggling and the hair splitting and the self-justification and the angsting. Just get on with it. But I'm likewise very interested in whatever differences you perceive between Virginia Woolf's letters and her journals. That's another whole thing. We were talking about journals earlier, and to me, a letter seems like a slightly more formalized journal, as if, let's say, those stages that turn around, they're stages in the round, and they actually spin. It seems to me a letter sort of looks toward a section of audience, whereas a journal may have no audience, and those tones are directly informed by what audience may or may not be there, and also what there's so many elements coalesce inside these kinds of um, thoughts. When you are writing to someone you love and admire and respect, you want to impress them. I do. I want to show off for them. I want them to think I'm smart, and I want them to like me, and I want them to keep on wanting to write me. And so I do all I can to haul out my best marbles, and without being an idiot or an ass, I hope, to show them what I'm reading and thinking about, and hope that it will provoke and excite and enrich them enough to keep the ball in the air. At the same time, I think there is a luxurious bathrobe quality about letters with trusted friends, when you can let go of the character you'd like to present, let's say in more formal forms of writing, whether fiction or nonfiction, and just be the person who is looking for a really, really good cup of coffee or margarita or piece of chocolate. Uh, that kind of dropping the stage persona and hanging out in the dressing room in your bathrobe persona is one of the great luxuries and wild freedoms of letter writing, that I think informs what we do later in more formalized work. I just thought of something else. Jessica Mitford used to start every day writing letters to, quote, warm up, unquote. And I always thought that was kind of delicious too, because I do think the engine, it may have different specialties, but it's the same engine. Do you track?
Yeah, I do. I do know what you mean.
So I can see warming up with letters. In fact, I do it myself every single day. In fact, it's an indulgence. It's like eating dessert first, to write letters before turning to, oh God, the story to hand,
Mhm,
the work to hand, the project to hand.
mhm. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, I do think it's a pleasure to be able to write, and I often feel, well, I don't know, should I be confessing this? I feel really guilty in many ways because I put so much work before pleasure,
Mm.
and I feel that, and I think about this constantly, especially now, with the pandemic, of course. I think perhaps that should be reversed. Shouldn't the because I often feel that, in my emails or letters, or that they're far too rushed, and they're just, just sort of, where I have so much I really want to say, but it's really, kind of happening at the end of, a long work day or something. And I think, this is really it, like so many things, is this really how it ought to be? And, you know, the better angel of me says, no, this is not how it's meant to be. And so, yeah, I think that might have gotten a little bit, sideways from your question.
It's all part of the same investigation. I think sometimes that however rushed or haphazard or slapdash, when we get a chance to blurt to each other whatever the hair on fire concern is du jour, um, we're upholding some marvelous tradition of supporting one another's art.
I agree. I agree 100%. And it's the
Even if the art is not the letter itself, you see?
correct. Oh,
Yeah.
absolutely. It's absolutely that, knowing that, knowing that that the, reader, the recipient of the letter, completely gets that, and that is part of the, it goes beyond the witnessing. There's a very deep sort of, connection of,
Meeting. Yes.
yes,
Yes.
of,
As if, and because the artist's life is so lonely in the main, so lonely, the idea of someone actually, truly, not falsely saying, "Yes, I know just what you mean," is a consolation like little else, and a nourishment.
right,
I mean, like taking food in that will help you make the long crossing. I don't think I could live without the a heavy leaning on letters and correspondence. And for me, email is just a more fluid version of the old
right.
paper and pen tradition, and a more instantaneous one. Perhaps that is, what is the word? A spoiling thing or a contaminating thing. But I don't see it that way. I see it as a supporting ventilation, if that's not oxymoronic. And
Well,
I'm thankful every day for it.
that it can be there, that it can be there is an amazing thing. I mean, I know it's very difficult to remember for many of us, or think about, um, what it was before that possibility existed.
Right, true. And listen, do you write letters to authors you love, Peg? Because I certainly do. And they may or may not answer. Lots of times they do. And I can tell that it made them happy because, even when they're famous, they're often just feeling as isolated. And whether or not there's a pandemic going on, as any of the rest of us struggling away.
Mhm.
So I believe in that. I do believe in that as well. Saying to an author, while yet we both live, you reached me.
Right.
It meant something. I'm thanking you for it now with a living, breathing hand. I think most of them, if they still have their wits and they're feeling still part of the human race at all, will make an effort to say, thank you. This meant something back because it did.
Mhm. So true. And I think, well, I mean, think of how well, it means quite a bit to me anytime I receive any kind of um, email or email. I mean, letters come in the form of emails. Today, it's very meaningful to me. It's hard to even explain how meaningful it is. Um,
What about Peg?
but I think isn't it so but I think also I've had this conversation with others who feel I wouldn't know what to say to someone and feeling a sort of a need to sound smart or like they don't know how to really um approach uh an author to say how much what they wrote meant to them. Do you have any sort of tips? Like, what would you, I don't know, I didn't think we would get into the how to, like a help book, but do you have any ideas? Like, what would you tell someone?
I would say blurt, just blurt, because that's what's most earnest and sincere. It doesn't have to sound smart, and you get completely paralyzed if you try to sound smart in that regard. So just blurt. I've received a couple of lovely ones. I got one today where the person just said, "I don't know really how to say this, but it meant something." It's a gorgeous. It's one of those few authentic, unrehearsed moments that help you connect the dots. I wanted to ask though, Peg, it occurred to me while we're in pandemic land, one of my husband's and my little projects is to try to go through old photographs and decide what to jettison, what to mail away, what to keep, however, whatever any of those may mean. And it occurs to me that letters are old photographs. And how do we decide what to keep, what to flush? And when it's email, everything's flushable, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everything. And for a while there, I was printing them right and left and storing them in file folders and thinking, oh, these will go with my archives or what have you. And now I'm just flushing everything in a kind of a wild, nihilistic table clearing, just gone, because in my nihilistic frame of mind, who really cares, and how will it matter? Um, if I had lots of paper and a really much better printer, I might print them more. But it's not happening right now. And they are old photographs. Do you not agree? You look back at them and you see who you were, right?
Yes,
And
absolutely.
so, what's your policy?
Yeah, you are completely asking the wrong person right now because I don't have a policy yet. I don't know, but I think about it. I think about it constantly. I'm still trying to decide what to do with many years of journals
Oh dear.
because honestly, it's what can these mean to whom, right?
Mhm.
Um, so I don't know. I don't have the answer for that. I really don't, and I think about it. I think about it quite a lot. But also, haven't your didn't a library take your papers, Joan? So
Yes.
wouldn't
Yeah,
your
but I no longer believe in the efficacy or importance of all the letters I consider in their moment most urgently wonderful. I'm just sort of thinking, nah,
yeah,
let it go. I don't know. I could, maybe I won't be around to drastically regret it. Maybe somebody else will. Who knows?
yes, but I really think if you're thinking about that, uh,
Dissuade.
I would like to see exactly what of my letters you might think about sending to your archives.
No, none. Seriously, none. I it it, it was an idea, but that idea's moment has gone.
Okay.
But I do still believe in the catharsis of letters, and I would be lost without it. I think if I could convey one primary thought about the whole the whole function of it, that would be it. That would be it. And also sometimes more, which is that we learn from others through their letters, through the collections we admire. Maybe now's a good time to bring up a few of those. Is this a good time?
Right. I think we're getting to the end.
Yes, we
I'm
are.
going to say that I also wanted to just very briefly remark that several years ago, Tom Lux said, everything that you might want to know about writing can be found in Chekhov's letters, A Life in Letters. So I haven't finished reading this. I dip into it now and again. So I guess, maybe I'll never know everything there is to know about writing. But that was very meaningful to me. I think a lot of that collection. We also mentioned the letters of Virginia Woolf. There are volumes of them.
Right.
I think volume 3 is pretty amazing, because some of these letters were when some of her books that Mrs. Dalloway and so many of her, she writes about these books being published, and I think it's a very moving collection of letters. I mentioned the Edith Wharton letters, and then Between Friends, the correspondence between Hannah Arendt and Mary McCarthy.
Yes, ma'am. Yes, please. Yes, please. Also,
so beautiful.
Yeah. Gorgeous. As you mentioned earlier, Vincent van Gogh's letters to his brother Theo bears rereading again and again.
Absolutely.
Excruciatingly beautiful and inspiring. William Maxwell's letters to Sylvia Townsend Warner, called The Element of Lavishness. William Maxwell's letters to Frank O'Connor, The Happiness of Getting It Down Right. And there's no time for this, but it's good. Well, I'll leave it at that. That's good enough for the time being. Yeah. It was a gorgeous discussion, as fleeting as it was.
So fleeting.
I loved it. Now, do we need to address questions from people?
Just again, I wanted to say,
thank you. Thank you.
Mirrored, but just a gorgeous love letter. So
thank you, Peg.
So
and this one too.
People get this book.
It's a beautiful cover. You see it? Absolutely gorgeous. That's great. Everybody take a look.
And we can see the covers
good.
Well, and they're facing the right direction. So thank you for thinking of that. I'd like to say, so we are just about at the top of the hour, but we do have an audience question, and I'll just ask you if you don't mind staying over just a few minutes. And I'll just say to the audience, thank you so much for joining us. We invite you to stay with us, but we also want to be conscientious about your time. So if you do need to move along, please accept our thanks at this moment for joining us, and we hope to see you again. And if you can stay for a few minutes, please do. We'll ask the audience question, and there may be a little bit more discussion that comes out of that. And take note of the chat. Patricia's been posting the links to the books that Joan and Peg have just referenced, as well as to Joan and Peg's books. And thank you so much. And I have a question as well, but I want to ask the audience question first, which is posed to Joan, but I think both of you can speak to it. And it's, would you mind talking a bit about getting specifically the Outlook for Earthlings published, if it took a long time? And this is I think the heart of the question: how did you deal with the ambiguity of that?
Ambiguity is an interesting word, and I'm wondering if this questioner knows something.
I think it's someone that you know. It's another Patricia. I'm reticent. Yeah.
Yes, I have a feeling I know who's asking and I know why. Yes, the outlook for Earthlings has a very dramatic history. And I have written an essay about it because how in the world else is one going to exorcise certain demons? I finished that novel in 2003, following the death of a beloved best friend. And it took all those intervening years to locate a publishing home. It went the rounds of many agents, one of whom adored it, could not sell it, and subsequently died. Other agents kept it in their laps for a while and eventually informed me that it wasn't a project they wished to pursue further. And finally, like Joseph and Mary looking for a room at the inn, I went from door to door, stable to stable, and at long last, located Regal House Publishing in Raleigh, North Carolina, of all places. I was so stunned to finally find someone who unequivocally wanted it. I wondered whether I were dreaming. And I've written about this because it's almost a textbook illustration of the near fanatical drama required of an author in her persistence and her belief when trying to find projects a publishing home. I wouldn't stand up in front of a microphone clutching my Academy Award, telling people, you can do it, always believe. I would say, take your vitamins and do your exercises, because it's a long, long haul, or can be. If it isn't, God bless America and God bless you. But certainly, it's that story is the poster child for the weirdest possible thing that can happen. And I hope it doesn't freak people out, but I see no reason not to tell the truth about it. So thanks for asking. Thanks.
Peg, do you have anything you'd like to contribute, just to thoughts on
No,
getting published, or or the sort of feelings that might come along with all of that?
well, I think, I think that Joan covered it very well, as she does. This was a book in particular that meant so much to her, and and it's such a beautiful book. It's just so strange. Obviously I've read all of Joan's books and I'm very, very familiar with them. And why this particular book, I think about it quite a lot. Like, is it, well, I think we probably have, I think we don't have time for this discussion, to be honest, but there's no real reason why this uh, this novel should not have been published, long ago. I'm just so glad that it's now out in the world. It's I had such a difficult time even figuring out what to read today, and I'll still go back and think, well, I should have read this or I should have read that. I mean, I have a million dog ears and so many comments, and there's so many just on the sentence level, there's so much evocative um, language that
Thank
that
you, Peg.
it's my
Thank you.
own writing. No, but really, so anyhow, I just I think it's just difficult. Who knows the mysteries um, of the publishing world today. I think that I think it becomes more and more hard to understand in certain ways.
Yes, certainly, yeah.
It does. It just really does. And I'm certainly very glad that her publisher published this book. And I think it's, it would just be remiss of me not to say, look to your small publishers for really beautiful, uh, beautiful work. I think that's where you're going to find find books that are going to really change the way you change the way you see things, or at least at minimum are going to touch you very deeply. So
my thanks again to you, Stephanie, and to Malaprops, and to emphasize what Peg said. Yes, please, everybody, support your indies. I know you hear this a lot. If you're watching us, you all probably already do, but it's worth repeating because they are the true heroes. They always were, but especially so during this plague year.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate that. I've really enjoyed listening to you this evening. Thank you both for your really beautiful readings, and the folks from Regal House were actually on the call and mentioned how wonderful an idea it was to read each other's works. Your publisher, Joan, and it is a wonderful, that is a wonderful idea. Usually authors are reading their own work, and I think there was something even more sort of meaningful in the two of you reading each other's work. So thank you. I think that was lovely. Yeah. So we will say thank you again to everyone, particularly to Peg and to Joan and to everyone who's joined us this evening and supported us and supporting your local your indies as well. We really appreciate it. We hope to see you again, see you in quotes, as it were, at another event. And please stay safe. And stay well, take precautions. That continues to be necessary. And we want to keep everyone around to continue to enjoy books and authors together. So please do that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Good night. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night. Thank you.